Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we're here live at the World Trade Center in Seattle. I'm here with Jim Makoso, founder of Lucid Oils. Jim is a cannabis extraction processing professional in the cannabis industry. In January 2015, he co-founded Lucid Lab Group, a cannabis extraction technology company based in Seattle. Jim's vision was to create a scientific approach to cannabis essential oil processing by utilizing customized capital equipment in combination with proven scientific processes. By taking a quality-centric approach, Jim has created a company culture known throughout the industry for quality in product and process. Prior to co-founding Lucid, Jim engaged Vuber Technologies as an angel investor in January of 2014. He joined the business management team, where he held the position of vice president responsible for strategic partnerships and business development until October of 2015. He remained on the board of directors until December of 2016, and by spearheading a business model focused on product development while maintaining a customer-first approach, Vuber has become a leading vaporizer company with strong partnerships that include manufacturers, cultivators, processors, and retailers throughout the U.S. Prior to his involvement in the cannabis industry, Jim was a finance professional in New York for 6 years. He holds an economics degree from Stony Brook University with a focus in business finance. Jim, thanks for being on board.
Thanks for having me.
And a little bit about the World Trade Center. We're here at the World Trade Center in Seattle. They've got some good conference rooms. There's also a World Trade Center in Tacoma, which is the lone trade service for the Pacific Northwest. The World Trade Center in general, they grow trade and investment by providing direct access to the largest business network in the world with 300 offices in 99 countries. Their World Trade Center seminars and award ceremonies and conferences can generate contacts and contracts. Trade research can clarify opportunities, and their matchmaking can turn those opportunities into trade. They have an e-commerce store as well. And so the export store is partnered with Alibaba. It's translated in 18 languages and can help your product get into hard to reach spots like Asia. They also have international letters of credit and bank guarantees to help you with your shipping. And so jumping right into the extracts panel, plant extraction is referred to as a natural product obtained from tissues of a plant with the desirable properties. Therapeutic phytochemicals, essential oils, and herbal extracts are gaining importance as they lead to the development of novel drugs, cosmetic products, and food additives. Growing demand for plant extracts from in-use industries such as food and beverage, cosmetics, and pharmaceuticals for flavor, color, and nutrition has influenced from a shift in consumer preferences towards herbal or natural medicines, thereby fueling that market growth. And the worldwide plant market for extracts is expected to grow at a compounded annual growth rate of roughly 15% over the next 5 years to reach $24.6 billion by 2024. So Jim, how does this worldwide market for plant extracts compare to the cannabis extract market in the US?
Well, I think the worldwide, I'll call it holistic extract or plant extract market is kind of a forecasting, and what we're seeing here in the U.S. is more of a microcosm, specifically as it pertains to cannabis extracts. It's kind of a microcosm of what we're seeing around the world, and that is, Western medicine, which obviously I'm a proponent of, and I'm sure many people will speak to the efficacy of Western medicine and what it's done for longevity of life and healing in general. Western medicine has its place, but certainly what we're seeing in our Western culture is the kind of the shift in mentality to using more holistic approaches to healing than just say medicine or Western medicine specifically. And there's a number of reasons for that. I think, probably the biggest reason people are looking towards holistic treatments for, any set of ailments is because there are ways to treat yourself that don't involve, say, popping a pill. Pharmaceutical products in general typically have side effects, but usually their efficacy is targeted at a specific treatment protocol or a specific ailment. Let's just say in the case of anxiety, you take a pill, which is really just one compound to target whatever in your body is producing these chemicals that make you feel anxious. But in that process, that chemical could, and typically does, have adverse side effects. So you're seeing people who are going away from, say, the pharmaceutical approach of treating themselves and looking at holistic medicine. Diet, for instance, being the common thing that people are doing, eating whole foods as opposed to processed foods, which maybe not in the case of anxiety, but in the case of other ailments could show benefit. And we're seeing that, right, in a general sense, translate right directly down to cannabis, which in this country, as you know, and which is why we're here, cannabis being another tool or another piece to what some people are considering more of a holistic approach to treating ailments or for recreational purposes.
Mm-hmm. We're also seeing in the data that cannabis on the rec side is being purchased for medicinal reasons. And so I think there's that crossover. And in yesterday's podcast, when we were talking about marijuana media, we were talking a lot about brands and the transparency and how easy it is to kind of see through companies if you're not being transparent and being honest. And so I think a lot of the issues that we've seen in the general consumer market for finished products and goods has been a loss in consumer confidence. And so whether it's cannabis or otherwise, I think we're starting to see people wanting less ingredients and more of a holistic approach just in general. So I think the more normal cannabis is becoming, we're going to start to see more similar trends in the regular food industry, we'll say. So maybe the biggest initial barrier to entry for hemp and cannabis extraction is cost, which depends on a number of factors, including the preferred extraction method, volume, desired speed. And so what are the current assumptions around capital needs to build a viable extraction operation? I'm kind of seeing that CO2 is around anywhere from 40 to 400,000 and hydrocarbon is 35 to 200. Alcohol extractors are 60,000 if you want to make a THCO acetate, or a rosin press as low as $5,000. And so I'm wondering, how do businesses optimize capital investment for extraction businesses? Like if you're in an emerging market, what are the current assumptions around how much is it going to cost and how do people optimize that?
That's a great question. So, my company, Lucid Oils, which is our consumer brand, but really our overarching company, Lucid Lab Group, half of our business is what we call process solutions. Where essentially we develop technology to create an extraction facility. And that goes from specific instruments to processes to the complete facility solution. So we're very familiar with what you're talking about. When it comes to determining a budget for, let's say, a extraction facility, there's really three questions that we ask, not only ourselves, but in the case where we're doing this service for another group, a partner, for instance. There's three real considerations. The first is, what is the regulatory framework that we're operating in? Reason why that's important is, let's say in the case of certain Canadian jurisdictions, hydrocarbon is not even an option. So they're forced to go with, let's say, what some would consider or deem a much safer approach, which is CO2 extraction. Whether it's safe or not, we'll let the engineers and the safety personnel duke it out. But the idea is, if you know the regulatory framework, that will at least give you some general direction of the direction you'll go, and that impacts budget. The other consideration that we look at is what type of products are you trying to produce? Somebody who wants to create a holistic product that has a full spectrum extract is going to be different than somebody who wants to produce a high THC product, that's very repeatable from, say, state to state or country to country, but doesn't have any cannabis taste at all. That product that you're trying to produce is going to have a big impact on the equipment you need to produce it and the budget. And then the third consideration we look at is throughput. What I need for my friends, dinner party, the volume of oil to make infused olive oil and infused desserts and an infused meal is different than, say, a project we're working on in Colorado where we're going to be producing, hundreds of liters of oil every single day. So throughput is a big consideration. So when we take those three considerations, the regulatory framework, the types of products that we want to produce, and the throughput at which we need to operate at, that will determine the budget. So there is no one budget that'll get it done. But what I can say is, for those that want to do it at home, you just need some Everclear, some alcohol, or some ice water hash. To make ice water hash, you don't need any of that. You need water, ice, and a dryer, and you can produce hash. So Extract for production versus extract for home use are going to give you two different budgets. And then when it comes to extract for production, those that are doing something more boutique versus people who are doing really high throughput processing, is ultimately going to be much different budget. So I wouldn't say that there is a budget that will get you to the finish line. What I would say is, if you're thinking about getting into extraction or processing in general, you need to consider those three things. And if you don't know what you're doing, I would suggest you strongly consider getting help.
Yeah, I would echo that. We were talking about offline, war stories about putting in $1 million and not being able to get a single gram out of it. So if you're thinking that you can, and I'm talking to you, Montana, if you think that you can spend $10,000 on a rosin press and compete against Canadians who have 10,000 plus acres, I don't think you're going to be around very long. So it's something to think about. We are going to unpack that a little bit more with yields and a couple of questions down the road. Want to find out about efficiency and so forth. So terpenes are hydrocarbons similar to solvents like butane and propane in extracts. So does this create a dichotomy when discussing solvent-free options like rosin?
Yeah, in a way. I think what you're touching on is a lot of the miseducation that we see in the cannabis industry. We're still very much in the infancy of this industry from a professional standpoint, but what you're talking about is true. Yeah, terpenes are hydrocarbons. They have unique properties, and in some cases act just like any other solvent would. And certainly that's where you're seeing some people produce some of these really cool products, like, for instance, diamonds, which are a lot of the craze right now, is really just people taking fresh frozen material, extracting it with hydrocarbons at cold temperatures, and using the terpenes that are in there to resolubilize the cannabinoid sample such that it produces these pure crystalline THCA structures. And the terpenes from the plant itself are what's acting as the solvent to allow these crystals, these THCA crystals, to grow. But to go back
real quick, what makes diamonds desirable?
What makes diamonds desirable as a product is, one, they're pretty cool looking because it's a solid, pure THCA crystal. The THCA, or the acid form of the THCA molecule, forms a crystalline structure, and it needs a certain environment in order to do that. What makes it really cool is that after you've removed the hydrocarbons or the butane and propane mix, depending on what you're using to extract, what's left is just terpenes and cannabinoids. And in the case of high THC or plants, a THCA crystal, which is really high in purity. And when you have those little terpenes left over, it produces a beautiful product. There's a bunch of really good companies here in Washington and in California and Nevada, kind of where we operate, that are producing excellent products that have no residual solvents left over whatsoever, but certainly have these great flavors. And you get basically a product that's very, very similar to the plant itself. So unlike other forms of extract where you're damaging terpenes, damaging other components of the plant, flavonoids and other things, alcohols and esters that are in there, this gives you at least a flavor and taste profile and an effect that's similar to what you'd get from smoking, say, or vaping a flower. But to go back to what you were discussing previously, when it comes to terpenes being a hydrocarbon, and in certain domiciles, I wouldn't say in all Canada, but in certain areas, certain provinces, and certain towns in Canada that are completely against hydrocarbon because they've seen the stories of people blowing themselves up. These people who are doing open blasting still in some of these undeveloped states. And these places in Canada where are much more conservative here about this and just make it illegal. Can't do it. What I would say to that point is, it's just people are misinformed. But when we look at the safety component of operating with solvents in general, anytime you are stressing safety in an operation, be it at the state or provincial, federal, state, or even in your local municipality, I think that's a good thing. The problem that you get when you have so much regulation and misinformation is, as a person who's looking to get into that space, and let's say your interest was operating with solvents, you need to be, kind of a flag bearer and go and meet with these regulators and explain to them why what you're doing is safe and being able to prove it. with a process and engineering solutions and experience that show that you've operated with these solvents and pieces of equipment successfully and safely in the past. So information is the big kind of missing component to these new markets. People need to be informed, and that goes from the federal level all the way down to local municipalities.
We've seen maybe some of that misinformation, or at least the fear factor in Canada, being that October 17th was going to be the release date for Infuse. That's kind of round two. Last October, almost 9 months ago now, they released flower and some other products. Canada was going to release the second wave, being edibles and concentrates, on October 17th, and that was delayed for a couple of months through to December, mid-December, just for whatever reason. But when I was down at the Indo Expo in Portland recently, I saw a pretty cool little product, and it was for extracting terpenes specifically, and they had a yield, they were claiming to have a yield of 50%. So I'm kind of wondering, what I've heard in the industry is if you can expect to get about 12.5% yield, and that terpenes, that he was getting 50%. Now, when I Googled the company, I saw your mug. I saw your face on there. So that was pretty funny. That was one of the coolest things I saw at the Indo Expo. And then lo and behold, Jim's mug is like all over it. So can you tell me what that terpene machine is all about? Maybe explain that terpenes are kind of like the steering wheel in a car. The THC percentage is the gas to get you there, but the terpenes are the direction or effect. You talk about indica-like effects or sativa-like effects. Those are really the terpenes driving that effect. And then I kind of like to know a little bit more about that machine, because again, that was one of the coolest things I saw there.
Yeah. So the name of the company that we're partnered with to manufacture that particular instrument is called Tandem Technologies. And that company is a company that's had a lot of success in multiple industries, but their manufacturing prowess comes from developing vessels and specific pieces of equipment for the semiconductor industry, working with subsidiaries of really, really large semiconductor companies. And, you name the big ones, and they've worked with subsidiaries of those companies. So that particular piece of technology was spawned out of a much more rudimentary system that we built in our laboratory, our processing laboratory in Nevada, our production laboratory in Nevada. And basically the whole idea for us is, unlike a lot of other people that are extracting cannabinoid or terpenes, as just a part of their cannabinoid extraction process, we had a really, really sharp technician is working with us a couple of years ago, kind of bring in this technology and basically show us a way that we could extract terpenes without using any solvents and before we extracted cannabinoids, such that we were able to get a sample of terpenes that were devoid of any cannabinoids and that was most representative of what we could see in the plant. And so that process is, we're calling it sweep gas distillation, but we built a very rudimentary system of that. You've been using it in production in Nevada to isolate terpenes for a couple of years now. Then we worked with a company in Florida to do a much larger scale version of that, and to do some development work to see how it would work at larger scale. And we had some success, and certainly then we partnered with this company, Tandem Technology, to produce a commercial version of that technology for the market. But when you say 50% terpene recovery, and I think there is a misnomer there, is 50% of what's available is what we expect to recover minimally. So in the case of, let's say, if you extract you pull a plant out, you dry it, and once you've dried it, before you've gone through the curing process, there's 10% terpenes there. It'll probably be closer to like 3 or 4 or 2. But let's say it had 10% terpenes. What we're saying is this instrument can get at least 50% of what's there, and that's conservative. In our trial runs, we've done much better than that. But what I will say is technology for extracting terpenes at the moment is rudimentary at best. Most people extract it along with their cannabinoids and then reintroduce a terpene cannabinoid mix into their products. Our goal a couple of years ago when we first started doing this was to just isolate terpenes and get terpenes for their profiles that were unique from plants that we thought were amazing. And we worked with a couple of different companies to get really high quality product to try it out and to see how it would affect our final product, which in Nevada is distillate cartridges and concentrate applicators. And so we applied these naturally derived cannabis-derived terpenes that we extract out of the plant. We reintroduce those into our products, into our extract products, to produce like a wholly cannabis product with no outside additives, no other terpenes, just cannabis-derived terpenes. So, you know, it's something that we've been doing down there for, you know, for a little while. And we think that the terpene extraction process is rudimentary at best in this country, in the cannabis industry. I think that there's going to be a bigger push to get better and better at extracting terpene profiles, and for a number of reasons. But as you mentioned, you know, depending on the profile of a cannabis plant will determine the efficacy. If you just take a, you know, if you just try some THCA, concentrated THCA or concentrated CBD, you may get some effect, but it's never going to be as dynamic as the effect you get from a mix of cannabinoids and a mix of terpenes, which, you know, what you'll hear called the entourage effect. And so what we're finding is it's a combination, kind of that holistic approach we were first talking about. It's a combination of these compounds together that are leading to efficacy, where, you know, for instance, a terpene like limonene, which you'll find in lemons and other citrus fruits, but also happens to be in cannabis, since all terpenes are throughout the plant kingdom are the same. Limonene in one plant is the same as limonene in another plant, but limonene is known to be more alert, and it will help to give you kind of more of that uplifting feeling, cerebral feeling, whereas, you know, something like myrcene, which you find in mangoes, will give you kind of, it's more sedative in nature. And so when we see these terpene profiles, we're seeing, you know, numbers of hundreds of terpenes in these plants, and maybe you concentrate it down to 30 or 40 that you'll detect at the lab, but there are really small amounts of terpenes in there and flavonoids that we don't know of yet that have definitely affect and modulate the effect of what you get when you're consuming cannabis. And I think as we look more deeply into how these compounds all interplay to give us an entourage effect, we'll find that the terpenes have just as much value as cannabinoids, and definitely can modulate the effects that you get from person to person.
That's really exciting. I was excited about the CBD to THC ratio of a 1-to-1 back in 2015 as being that euphoric, energetic, uplifting experience. And now that CBD has become mainstream, I think maybe the new thing that we're seeing wholesale, at least what I'm seeing, is CBG and some of those other rare cannabinoids, CBN, THCV. But I believe that the hype you're seeing around CBD is going to eventually become terpenes. I think what people really want is the effects that terpenes can give you, whether it's, you know, limonene for that uplifting, or lavender. People are familiar with essential oils and lavender and the calming effects with that. And so terpenes are going to be very, very exciting coming forward. But we'll save that for the last question. The yield, let's jump back into that. So an extractor's yield is the amount of components of interest obtained from an extraction's output. And CO2 extraction yields vary on a number of factors, including starting material, material prep, grind size and consistency, and extraction parameters. In addition, data shows that the varying concentration of CBD and THC can significantly impact the overall time for complete cannabinoid extraction. And so you mentioned that the yield on average in any given day could be somewhere from 3 to 15%, I guess. Is that what I heard you say?
On terpenes?
For the yield for like CO2, for example.
I see. Well, you know, we could look at yield in terms of percentage based on weight. One thing we found in extraction, and, you know, we learned this early on. Somebody told, you know, first extraction kind of that I learned was hydrocarbon, but in my own facility, when we were doing it commercially and not just as a hobby, was CO2. And we had an Eden Labs high flow 20-liter CO2 extractor, and we were told we should be able to extract, you know, 80% potency oil, and we should be able to get 10 to 15% efficiency on the extraction. We found out in pretty short order that that's all BS. At the end of the day, what you get out is what you're able to put in, plus your efficiency of extraction, plus the extractor. So, what you can get from an efficiency standpoint, from CO2 to hydrocarbon to ethanol extraction to other types of separations, mechanical separations, dry sifting, all is dependent on all of those factors. So there isn't, what I will say is all extractors are going for the highest efficiency possible. In my experience, we've gotten the highest efficiency in extraction from ethanol extraction. That's why we switched from CO2 extraction to ethanol extraction. That and a number of other reasons. There are companies out there that are very efficient at extracting with CO2. And when I say efficient, it's tough to say 5 to 15% is what you'll get out. It's always a function of what you have in there. If you have 5% material, 5% potency material, be it CBD or THC, and you're getting out 6% oil, obviously either somebody tested wrong or you're lying. The idea is you can only get what's in there, So as an extractor, it takes me the same amount of time to load into my machine 5% oil or 5% potency material or 25% potency material. The idea is we always want the best quality material because it takes the same amount of time, effort, and energy to extract.
So let me ask this then. How do you produce enough product without compromising quality?
Well, that's pretty straightforward, and that's simple. If you have excellent processes and excellent people, no matter what you put in there, you're going to get the best quality out. The emphasis for extraction in our facility and anyone we work with is always to be the most efficient while keeping it safe and with good people. So, what we produce in, say, Nevada versus what we'll produce in Canada versus what we produce in Washington is all a function of having good SOPs and good people. If you have the same procedures in different markets, no matter what, with good people, you're always going to be able to get to those high efficiencies of extraction with high quality products. So I would say our motto, or really kind of our credo underlying our business, always has been clean, clear, and potent. So we like to produce really clean product. In the case of our distillate, we like to be clear, and transparent, and potency always has to be high. So a function of doing all of those things is never skimming on quality, always following the same procedure no matter where you are in terms of how you extract, and that's how you get to having really consistent quality. And you'll find that there are companies out there, we're not the only ones. There are companies that are just focused on quality. And that's not a popular, stance, because if you focus always on putting out only really high quality products, there's a percentage of material that is not going to meet your standard that others will sell no problem, but that you may have to decide what you're going to do with, either sell it as an edible oil or make another brand with a lower quality and a focus on less quality. Our brand, our consumer red Lucid oils, has always been known for having really, really high quality, which is not always popular as a as a product creator. But from our standpoint, we only produce products that we would consume.
Yeah, right now the number one question when you walk into a rec shop or dispensary is what's the highest THC at the lowest price, or what's the highest THC within my budget. So that's kind of why it's not popular to have a top shelf product, is because people want to have something that's really, really cheap. And so, yeah, Colombia has the opportunity to be that big box store with the low labor costs and as much as they're producing. So it's going to be interesting taking a look at how Colombia rolls out. But I'm wondering about, we talked about different methods, how that impacts the product. And I'm wondering how these systems will be suitable for future extraction of other rare cannabinoids like the CBG and CBN and THCV, because CO2 typically produces a more flavorless extract that requires more refinement because it carries more chlorophyll, lipids, or wax, and undesirable compounds than hydrocarbon extraction. So light hydrocarbons are affected because they're strong nonpolar solvents that bind to the cannabinoid structure and terpene of the plant. Other solvents, such as ethanol, may bind to chlorophyll or cellular structure, which leaves a darker color and less desirable taste. Some systems are better at making particular products. So, for example, hydrocarbon systems can make shatter fairly easily, while CO2 extractors typically utilize heat, which makes shatter production difficult. However, CO2 systems with cold separation technology are less likely to cause thermal degradation to the product. So there's a lot of options, but ultimately, will these options be suitable for future extraction of other rare cannabinoids?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think when it comes to extraction of rare cannabinoids, these processes are excellent for extracting cannabinoids. As it turns out, the plants that we grow right now are either really high in THC or really high in CBD, because over the last, call it 50 or 60 or 70 years, we've bred these plants to produce high THC. The plant naturally produced a higher amount of CBD, and we bred a lot of those plants out of existence, at least for a commercial application, because people wanted to get high. Now you're seeing people now breed more strains that have, even ratios, or strains that have less THC and more CBD. Some people are trying to breed strains that have no THC in it at all, which would have a huge amount of commercial viability for people who are doing hemp, really large hemp projects. But what I would say is, when it comes to extracting is just focused on extracting all compounds that have that similar structure. The cannabinoids all have a similar-ish structure. When it comes to, let's say, isolating individual compounds, you see that more in the post-processing or refinement stages of the extraction process. Extraction is just meant to separate cannabinoids and terpenes to a lesser extent from the biomass. Let's toss that biomass away. Now we have a concentrate. Mid 50s, mid 60s in potency for people who are mediocre, and for people who are really good at the extraction process, they're extracting 80 in the 80 percentile total cannabinoids plus other things, terpenes, flavonoids, esters, alcohols, etc. Then what people like my group has always done from the beginning is try to separate even further. Now, this is where you'll see a divergence from people who are like, all right, I want holistic extracts, and I want everything in there, so just give me that extract, and that's what I want. But there are people who want a refined product. Let's say some edible manufacturers, they don't want to taste any cannabis in their product, and they want to work with something that's easy to work with. So distillate became a very popular input material for some edible manufacturers. Not all, but I would say many. So there's another step of removing out now, as you mentioned in the CO2 process, fats, lipids, waxes, hydrocarbons to a lesser extent. You get some of these compounds. The colder you get, as it turns out, the less water-soluble chlorophyll, fats, lipids you get in the extraction process. But then there is another step, filtering out and then distilling the oil such that you're only pulling over things in a specific boiling point range, or in our case, cannabinoids. So now you have a cannabinoid matrix with no terpenes, no lipids, no fats, no heavier plant waxes, just cannabinoids. And so that's a refined product. Now some people are taking it one step even further. And in the case of the hemp industry, what we're seeing now is isolate be popular. Now, we've seen isolate from a price standpoint come back substantially, CBD isolate, which is that white powdery, looks almost like drugs. It looks like a drug. And if you ever had a bunch of it and you got pulled over by the cops or something like that, you'd have a big problem, because it looks like it's just a clean white powder, and it looks like it could be any white powder out there. Sure, you can use your imagination, but that's another process, crystallization of CBD, to produce as close to pharmaceutical grade purity extract as possible, which is just one compound. In that case, you're just going after the CBD molecule that's been decarboxylated, that produces a crystalline lattice structure and gives you that white powder. So there's a number of methods to get to, let's say, an isolate or an isolated compound like CBD, or an isolated compound like THCA. There are similar methods for separating out other components of the plant that are not CBD or THCA. For instance, you mentioned a few, CBG, cannabigerol, which is kind of the cannabinoid that is the first cannabinoid that all the other cannabinoids kind of are produced out of, or when you change them, when you have enzymes interact with the CBG molecule, you get these other molecules, THCA being one of them, CBD being another. But there are other compounds, degradation compounds. For instance, you mentioned CBN. CBN, the plant does not produce CBN. CBN is a degradation compound where when THC or CBD is exposed to light or oxygen, will eventually turn into CBN, which, if you've ever smoked really old weed, usually it has some CBN, and that's why you get the couch lock every time. I've never smoked old weed and not got cow shock. I try not to smoke old weed anymore, but every now and then, that's all you got is something that you found because you were, in Washington, you have less of that problem out here, but you get the idea. But there are people already that are starting to use these refinement techniques to isolate individual cannabinoids like CBG, like CBN, like THCV, which is great appetite suppressant. And the plants produce these compounds, maybe in smaller amounts, but they're produced. And there are people who are going out of their way to figure out ways to identify that and isolate them. Because at some point, people are going to realize there's a lot more cannabinoids in this plant than just CBD and THC that have fantastic benefits. Another one cannabinoid that we're real interested in that we've started producing kind of as a mistake when we first started 4 years ago doing distillate was CBC, cannabichromene, which is showing in some white papers and in some really small examples, not with humans, that it seems to have some efficacy in neurogenesis. So it could be great for neurodegenerative disorders like Huntington's disease or Alzheimer's. Yeah, absolutely. So we're just scratching the surface. Companies that, as you mentioned before, are not thinking about just money. We got to, I'm a capitalist. So we got into this business to make money. But more than that, we got into this business to do cool things that no one has ever done before and to provide alternatives to just the standard Western medicine solution for things like, for real ailments like Alzheimer's or Huntington's disease or post-traumatic stress. All of these types of ailments, there are compounds in this plant, which is so unique, that have shown could be a good modulator or could be a good solution to try as a different form of treatment. And so as we develop more and more ways to isolate these compounds, I think you're going to see research institutions and medical institutions start to get a hold of some of these compounds and start to not only do in vitro or in vivo trials, but start doing human trials, clinical trials with clinicians behind it using these compounds found in our plant. So that stuff's exciting. And I think the groups that are focused on that type of work, not only will they, get the headlines, but I think there's a financial reward way, way off in the distance if they just focus on doing good work now.
So that is really exciting. And to kind of break that down as to why it's exciting, there's opportunities that we're taking a look at with a lot of these rare cannabinoids. And so when you look at an isolate, it's kind of like a high fructose corn syrup. We've called isolate on this podcast hot dog water. And so it makes me edgy, kind of like green crack. There's something in it where it just makes me kind of edgy and irritable. And when you have an isolate, nobody wants high fructose corn syrup over honey.
Green crack, the strain we're talking about, not crack.
Correct.
That's the color.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And so I think that the entourage effect that you mentioned that became kind of famous with Dr. Ethan Russo is adding THC with CBD and allowing that kind of dual effect, if you will, to be better than just one on its own. So CBD with THC is better. An isolate isn't as better as a full plant extract. So I'm wondering if you can maybe dive into that, because we're seeing billboards from a local CVS equivalent called Bartell Drugs. And I think they have full plant isolate, maybe. I think they have something that's awkward, that's just weird. And so that's some misinformation. But I'm wondering if you can maybe just dive into why isolate isn't maybe as good as full plant.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say maybe. I personally, as a person who creates products, I wouldn't say one is better than the other. I would say they all have their own application. What I would say is that it's proven that it's and there's research on this. You can go on ResearchGate. That's my preferred method to get white papers and things like that. But you can go online and easily type in CBD and THC and dig a little bit and find some papers about this. But the idea is these plants, and it's been shown these compounds specifically together have beneficial effects when they're working together. I'll give you an example. The reason why you see people have more, where there's more efficacy for people who are actually using CBD, let's say, for the treatment of epilepsy. I know a woman She started a company called Nana Secret Soda, and she has epilepsy, and she uses CBD to treat her epilepsy. But her treatment protocol involves THC as well, because THC for her opens up the pathway, whichever receptor it is, CB1 or CB2, I'm not sure, but whatever receptor is in our bodies and our endocannabinoid system, it's not quite available unless there's a little bit of THC to allow us to uptake the CBD that we ingest more readily. So, for her, she noticed, and she kind of did these experiments on her own, that CBD alone didn't work for her. It was not until she started taking a 2-to-1, 3-to-1, and 4-to-1 protocol of 4 parts CBD to 1 part THC in her vape pens or edibles that she noticed that it would actually help calm her the spasms that she was having when she felt an onset incoming episode of a seizure. So I think it's no secret, and you'll read about this in papers, that these compounds together modulate how they interact in your body. Now, obviously, that's kind of what the pharmaceutical companies are targeting, right? Because for a drug to come out and to make it all the way through FDA trials and to become approved for use by a human being, it has to be one compound acting on one ailment. And that's completely against what we're trying to do here, obviously, in the cannabis industry. So, to backtrack, is there a use for CBD in an isolated form? For sure. I think there are companies that are putting these into products, and there may be some benefit there. Personally, I consume, I'm a big consumer in general. I would say recently I've tapered off of heavy THC consumption, and it's probably because I work a lot and there's a lot of stress, and THC, especially high amounts of THC, affect my mood and give me anxiety. And I have enough stress. I don't need anxiety to add to the mix of my workload. So I consume CBD, and typically I consume a lot of CBD with a very small amount of THC so that I can uptake it more effectively. For me, it works exceptional for things like inflammation. Like I snowboard in the winter, so I'll pop a little bit of CBD, and typically the mixes I make for myself are 5-to-1 or 6-to-1 CBD to THC. Maybe take 10, 20 milligrams of on the CBD side, and so I'm maybe a couple milligrams of THC. But I noticed when I didn't have the THC in my CBD mixture, that I would take for inflammation for snowboarding, that I would almost get no effect. So THC definitely modulates the way that we uptake CBD into our bodies, and I'm sure it does for other compounds as well. But I would say CBD isolate has a place. And if that place, and far be it for me to judge, because I'm in the business of creating CBD isolate as a part of my business. But if the only reason why it's beneficial is that it allows people to have a part of the cannabis plant that makes cannabis mainstream, not only now in our country, but I was just in Europe a couple of weeks ago, in remote places, Croatia, in Bosnia, where people were just interested and knew about CBD and hemp. Just the fact that we can have those conversations, now it's becoming a worldwide conversation. If CBD isolate is paving the way for that to happen, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, shout out to the one guy in Baku as Bakistan that listens to the podcast. But to your point, the 20-to-1 CBD to THC ratio is phenomenal. I use that a lot. I was on a panel last week for the Chartered Alternative Investment Analysts group, the chapter here in Seattle. And I get along really well with numbers. People, on the other hand, make me a little bit nervous. And so, public speaking for me at this point in my career is still a nerve-wracking experience. So that 20-to-1 CBD to THC ratio is phenomenal. I killed it. At least maybe I didn't kill it. If you see the podcast and you don't think I killed it, I felt like I killed it. So that's all that matters. I felt really good with that 20-to-1. So shout out to Green Revolution. And so here's a follow-up. So Canada is legalizing concentrates and infused products somewhere between October 17th and mid-December. So I've consistently seen emerging markets release beverage emulsions with an oil ring formation at the top in a bottle, which could result in a consumer imbibing large quantities of the active ingredients, producing what could be a series of negative outcomes. I've also seen billboards that say mold to gold, offering to buy moldy cannabis for the purpose of converting it into concentrate. So, what's being done to increase the quality of these products to make them grass, generally recognized as safe, and recognized industry-wide as quality, stable, and safe product?
Well, there's two parts to that question. We're working on a project right now. We're building an extraction facility up in Canada, and unlike the U.S. market, or at least the U.S. markets that we're a part of, Washington, Nevada, California, where there's been a robust medical market for some years, with the exception of Nevada. But let's just say in the West Coast in general, up and down the West Coast, there's been a robust medical marijuana market for a long time. So people are generally educated on the whole process out here and extracts. And you may need to kind of fill them in on some of the new things that are happening. In Canada, we've had to educate everyone from the ground up on everything, as simple extraction to more complex forms of extraction, etc. So when it comes to specifically types of products that are being produced and the quality of those products, mold to gold, for instance, we used to joke about that all the time when we first started in Washington, that we would take moldy material that people were throwing away and be able to convert that into gold, distillate in the case, which distillate at that time, not too many people were doing it. Kind of the guy that's kind of known for bringing that to the cannabis industry, the clear scientist, guy from Boston who moved to California and started distilling oil for people on a short path distillation unit. And people went from seeing this black, crude garbage to this really transparent, kind of gold looking distillate, blew people away, blew people's minds. So we started doing that type of service. And the reason why, you see this mold to gold, or the ability to take junk and turn it into extract. Now, there are ways to do it that are unsafe. If you're taking, number one, we personally don't like to work with any material that's failed any type of microbial pesticide tests in any of our facilities, because it's much harder to remove something once it's there than to not have it there in the first place. So we prefer to work with the best quality material. But if you're doing really, really high volume toll processing, where you're pulling in material from outside sources, not just inside of your own grow, you're always going to run into material that doesn't meet the highest quality standards, and where your responsibility is to still get out clean, high quality oil. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In fact, I think companies that figure out ways to take something that would otherwise be useless and still be able to extract out cannabinoids that they can put into products in a clean and safe way is totally feasible. Now, in the case of, let's just talk about mold. If you're using solvents to extract, specifically if you're using, let's say, alcohol kills mold. So you're going to be able to easily kill any mold that's in there and get a product that it has no microbial activity in it whatsoever and no residual solvents from the solvents that you use. But you need somebody who's qualified and who has skill to do it. What I would say is, anytime you're producing any product for consumption, and this is a standard that we've held, and of course we're not as big as some of the really, really big companies that are doing this, but I would say we're fairly large. We would not put out any product that we would not ourselves want to consume. And I'm not saying that we're perfect. There are times that, like any company, especially in our infancy, where, when we were done with our product, we looked at it and we said, oh, we can't sell this. Like, we suck. We were terrible. You have those moments in a business where you produce something that you are not proud of, where you're staring at, hundreds of thousands of dollars of product, and you have to make that judgment call to put it back through the ringer, to extract it again, and to get it to a point where it's a product that you yourself would be comfortable to consume, so you'll be confident selling it. What I would say is, that's not every company. Not every company has that type of integrity where they're only putting out products that they themselves would consume. The difference between a company that lasts in this business, just like in any industry, and a company that doesn't, are companies that know that, yeah, you might be able to get away with something like that once, twice, 3 times. But if you're going to be in this industry for any long stretch, integrity, this industry, unlike many other industries, integrity is going to be a big part of why a brand lasts. People who consume cannabis definitely care about where it's coming from and who's providing it. And if you you have a mark on your integrity card where, you know, everybody you'll get a break one time, maybe even two times if you're a good brand. But after a period of time, if you show that you are putting out products that are not safe, you're going to go out of business. Like, it's going to happen. So, you know, we're a big proponent of only producing products that you yourself would produce. And there's pretty strict testing protocols now for products that you put out that you have to go through in order to be able to put them on the market. So I would say in most of the regulated markets, the products that make it to the shelves are pretty clean. You know, I would say that, yeah, I mean, do products still make it through? I'm sure they do. But that's going by the wayside, and it's because testing standards are just getting stricter and stricter. And from a consumer standpoint, that's fantastic.
So the process a cultivator selects will have an impact on quality, yields, productivity, and the legal safety requirements. So the cannabis industry does a poor job at meeting the needs of incoming mainstream consumer. The mainstream consumer expects a predictable product that's clearly labeled by effect. Instead, they're generally forced to choose a product based on unclear strain names. So the selection often leads to an unexpected or undesirable experience that keeps a novice user from returning to the cannabis space. Cannabis companies need to learn from other well-established CPG industries, and they can take that first step by creating precision formulations. A normal extraction process comprises several procedures, including the collection and authentication of plant material and drying, size reduction, extraction, filtration, concentration of drying, and reconstitution. However, extraction quality depends on various factors, such as plant parts used as an initial material, the solvents used, the extraction method, and the plant materials, solvent ratios, etc. So with the advancement of science and technology, remarkable progress has been made in the field of plant extraction with the discoveries of high-quality herbal products. As a result, modern methods of plant extraction are more effective over conventional methods. And so I'm wondering, with the help of this technology, with consuming edibles utilizing nanotechnologies, will it increase the bioavailability at the blood-brain barrier to speed up the onset of its effects?
Yeah, no doubt. You know, and this kind of touches on what you were saying about last product, about having, you know, this ring on, let's say, drinks, this little ring on the top of a drink. And that ring exists from a product that has not been fully immersed in a beverage. As we know, cannabinoids are not water soluble, right? So they're hydrophobic, they're lipophilic, they like to be in fat, which is why, you know, when you make, let's say, an edible, and if you're using butter, you know, back in the day, we used to make these brownies, and my friends would leave the weed in there, so you would be like eating brownies with weed in it. And I would always take like a sock, you know, like a church sock, which my friends would be like, oh, that's gross. I was like, you know, I wouldn't say it's as gross as eating weed, like the plant itself. It's not a very good tasting plant if you've ever tried it. Very, very bitter and spicy. Anyways, I would strain out the butter, or I'd strain out the weed, so that the only thing in the butter was really just the oil, which still had a very strong taste, but wouldn't have weed in it. That butter will be immersed into your brownie mix, such that you if you put a lot of oil in there, yeah, maybe you'll see it. But in the case of a beverage, something that's water soluble, because these because these compounds, cannabinoids, are not water soluble, you need to encapsulate them in some way, in something that could be soluble in water. But essentially, the nanotechnology that you're talking about is where we're taking this molecule, trying to get it to the smallest size possible, encapsulating it in something that's water soluble, such that when it is poured into water or some type of water soluble product, any beverage, you can't see it. It's essentially immersed, or it's immersed in the water, but with such small particle size, it looks like it's been emulsified or solubilized. That's never going to happen. It's what you're really seeing is somebody who knew what they were doing and got it to such a small particle size that you cannot see it, and it will not come out of solution. So there are some companies that are really good at that. There are other companies that are not as good as that. You know, a popular thing that you'll see some people do is they'll emulsify, or they'll solubilize the oil in alcohol and add alcohol to their mix, because alcohol and water are miscible, and then they'll see the cannabinoids kind of come out of solution, and that's where you get this ring. The bottom line is this: it is true. if you get a very small particle size, it becomes much easier to uptake these compounds and pass the blood-brain barrier, such that you might be able to absorb it in your stomach as opposed to your intestines, or absorb it in your mouth as opposed to your stomach. And when you are eliminating the amount of steps that you need your body to process these compounds, it becomes much more easily uptaken into our bloodstream and passing through that blood-brain barrier. So there are some companies that are really, really good at that type of technology, nano emulsions or nanoparticleizing these compounds. And there are some companies that say they are that aren't that good. So I think as the industry continues to develop, there will be some companies that emerge that are really good at this technology. And there'll be some companies that purport to be good at these technologies that are really good marketing machines. Like with any product and new method of administration, you got to try them out and see which ones work the best for you. Always tread lightly though, especially with THC. If you've ever have been, I know I've been, I'm sure Josh has been on the opposite side of taking too much THC. It can be a very disconcerting and uncomfortable feeling. And unfortunately, you'll be on that ride for several hours. So, always tread lightly. But in the case of nanoparticleized products or nanoemulsified products, always start with much smaller dose than you would normally take. And give yourself that requisite time, depending on if you ate and the time of day and how you feel, to feel it before taking more.
So essentially, companies that are using this new nanotechnology will be able to hopefully avoid overdosing. Is that accurate to say that the faux pas in this industry is to eat an edible, wait 10, 20 minutes, and then say, it didn't work, I'm going to eat another one. And then that's when you get that really uncomfortable heart palpitation. You're freaking out, panic mode sets in, anxiety. And by the way, consuming CBD, there's an inverse relationship. If you have CBD, won't it bring down your high if you overdose? But can you maybe describe how that nanotechnology will maybe reduce future overdoses?
I wouldn't say it would reduce future overdoses. I would say it would make it more likely for that to occur, because people who would consume, let's say, for me, 20 to 30 milligrams is my uncomfortable limit level, depending on if I've eaten and the uptake methods. If it's a drink, 20 milligrams is kind of like my limit, where if I continue to go past that in a session, I'll be the less cool version of myself, for sure. We'll need to be alone, preferably in my room, preferably with nobody around me. In the case of edibles, where it takes a little bit longer for your body to process, 30 milligrams. My business partner can consume 100 or 120 milligrams, no problem. And he might be buzzed, but he's certainly going to be very functional and easily be able to do what he would normally be doing. Everybody reacts differently. He has a higher metabolism than me. I have more what I would call dormant muscle, what others would call fat in my body. So, maybe I just uptake more of it. The bottom line is, if you need less, or if in the case of nanoparticleization, where much less will give you the same effect. So in the case of, let's say, a beverage, 20 milligrams would get me there. 5 milligrams might get me there with a properly nanoparticleized product. I think it would increase the propensity for overdose. But as a manufacturer, the reason why people love it so much is you might be able to, you should be able to use much less product, or much less cannabinoids in a given product. And because the uptake method with nanoparticleized, it should be able to absorb much quicker, you might be able to, instead of wait 30 minutes in the case of a beverage, maybe the uptake is 5 minutes, which is what I've experienced personally. Or in the case of an edible, instead of an hour, maybe it's 20 minutes. But the idea is the uptake is much quicker, so you should be able to get efficacy much quicker, and you should need much less cannabinoids to get the same effect. So I think it's going to be opposite of what you think. People are going to overdose much more.
So they're going to get higher because it's stronger, but they're not going to take as much edibles because it's going to hit them faster. So instead of waiting 30, 40 minutes and with no effect, it's going to hit them much quicker, yet be stronger. So it'll be interesting to see.
It'll be interesting to see.
So let's look at some market dynamics. There's a lot of development taking place in order to suffice the customer needs. A global medicinal plant extract market is growing to rising demands for herbal medicines and homeopathic products because of a change in consumer behavior. So how do you spot innovative products So thinking of like who's the greatest advancement in the cannabis industry, maybe that's you. What are they doing? So how do you spot innovative products?
Well, the only way to spot innovative products is to go to the market and see who's doing what. I mean, as a product manufacturer, we're innovative for sure, but I would say there are some companies that are exceptional at innovation. Putting out not only good products, but always trying to do something new. One of those companies, I'll just mention and plug them because I think they do great work, is a company called Binske, Binske. A lot of people pronounce it Binske, but it's called Binske, and it's run by these two brothers, originally from South Florida, and they created this brand. It's an edible and concentrate brand, lifestyle brand, and they're always coming out with like new, awesome, innovative products. When I first encountered their brand a couple of years ago, they had olive oil and these kind of like fruit leathers, which was like an all natural fruit infused product. Think of like an all natural fruit roll up, if you will. Excellent products. The olive oil, high quality. They were using high quality olive oil from Italy and infusing it. So it was just like olive oil that you would think was, and I think there are other people who are doing that good work like that, but they were one of the few companies where they had that model across a number of products, including some excellent chocolate. But they're always kind of innovating and coming out with kind of new stuff. Most recently they released a sauce pen. They were one of the first companies to come out with the sauce pen, or a pen using hydrocarbon sauce product, a vape pen infused with distillate, I believe they use, and fantastic product, #1 seller in Nevada. Really, really good product. But when it comes to product creation, I think the only way to really know what's new and innovative is to be plugged in, or if you are in a state where there's medical or recreational cannabis, ask the bud tenders. They see more product than you could imagine, and it's because it's their job to sell you products. So, a really knowledgeable bud tender will definitely have a beat on innovation and who's doing what. Outside of that, listening to podcasts like this one and being plugged into the industry from a information standpoint, there's a number of publications that release daily newsletters. There are magazines that come out that are always, trying to show off what's the next and best. Some that are more focused on technology, some that are more focused on product or specific compounds, like, Terpene and Testing magazine, for instance. They're always talking about the latest innovations in technology. There are a number of ways to be plugged in. Me as a product manufacturer, we are always looking at what's out there, but our focus is really more motivated internally. We just try to create awesome products. Of course, we're definitely motivated by other people who are creating awesome products, but we're a small company, so we don't try to measure up against what these really huge companies are doing, because a lot of times they're doing that to make money because they have to hit a bottom line. For us, anytime we're driven by innovation, like for instance in this terpene machine that we're building with Tandem Technology, that is primarily based in our ability and our desire to make something new. I like to build things. I like to always be creating something else. Otherwise I get bored. So, a lot of our innovation comes from just wanting to do something new and different.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the fact that you're using cannabis terpenes and reintroducing cannabis terpenes rather than getting like a banana terpene or whatever. So that's awesome. Wondering about other developments that you're seeing or other trends. So we're seeing like highly water soluble compounds along with better shelf life or other factors that are widening the application of the products in cosmetics and research and other industries. So anything else that you could think of, like other developments that you're seeing in extraction technology or other trends that you're seeing that's influencing these developments?
I would just say, in general, what's influencing development in general is the fact that cannabis as a class is becoming mainstream because of Western countries and maybe other countries in Central and South America that have made a stance. In the case of Colombia, Mexico, obviously the U.S. states and Canada as a country, by putting their stamp on it and saying, hey, we're going to allow people to operate companies that are focused on getting what's in that plant out of it. naturally that's going to spur on innovation and investment in these spaces. So I would not say that there's a trend that we are focused on. What I would say the big trends we're seeing is, especially from a global standpoint, is hemp, always been very popular in Europe and China to a lesser extent. They use hemp fibers in car parts and many different car parts in major manufacturers, and they've been doing that for a long time now, decade. Now that the U.S. and Canada are involved as big Western capital powerhouses, you're just seeing innovation in general. And so us as a product manufacturer and as a equipment manufacturer, through partnerships, we are seeing development both in the equipment side and development on the product side. And I wouldn't say that there's a trend, more or less. What I would say is that hemp globally, and the acceptance of hemp here in the U.S. and Canada has led us as a species, the human race, to really now see this as a product that is viable, that our ancestors used. And because we live in the 21st century where technology is growing and expanding at such a rapid rate, people are always trying to innovate in something that is always, that not only is capital, that can show tremendous amount of capital return, but also that the people are interested in. So cannabis as a industry, unlike maybe many other industries, at this particular time in history is at a crossroads where culturally it's being talked about around the world, thanks to hemp and THC obviously to a lesser extent, but hemp in general is definitely driving that conversation globally. We're in a technological age where technology is expanding at the fastest rate it ever has. And from a capital standpoint, as it turns out, people love weed. People love hemp. People love weed. And that's driving companies that are interested in innovation like us and companies that just want to make a dollar to get involved. So when you have that intersection of all of these interests, culturally, financially, you're going to get innovation. So from a trend standpoint, I mean, yeah, we're seeing trends of people popping up with these hemp grows and these hemp facilities. But some of the technology that's in there is still very much in development. People are trying to isolate compounds. Which compounds, they don't know. But the technology to isolate compounds is definitely a sub-trend we're seeing on the technology development side. On the product development side, what are the trends I think we've seen and we will continue to see is vape pens are becoming a huge thing globally. In Europe, we were watching just the idea of vaporizing. Marlboro produces this product now where they have a vaporizer, but you still put it, and this is hugely popular in all Europe, especially in what we'll call Eastern Europe, but out there is really just the Balkans, Central Europe, in Croatia and the Czech Republic and Serbia, even in Bosnia. I was seeing this was a couple weeks ago. I was there just chilling with my brother, and I always notice technology, especially vape technology. But Marlboro developed this like vaporizer where you essentially put in like a natural tobacco laden tube into a vaporizer to vape it. And everybody smokes, or let's just say a lot of people smoke in Europe, much more than the US. It's still a thing out there. But just to see that vape technology is starting to take hold on the tobacco side there. But vapes as a product class is going to continue to be what I think one of the most disruptive technologies and certainly drive a lot of growth in both the hemp and the marijuana space.
Yeah, we saw Altria put in, I think, $2 billion up in Canada to develop their vape technology. So it's definitely big. I think data is the second largest investment vehicle, and within that is technology. The number one tech is accurate dosing and vaping. So definitely big. But to kind of unpack the innovation a little bit. So innovation transforms a market or creates a new one through simplicity and convenience, affordability, or accessibility. Pre-rolls are huge sellers. Vapes are a huge seller because of the convenience factor. We're seeing a little bit of pushback right now on vaping damaging lungs. There's some news about whether it's Altria or vaping CBD is damaging some lungs. It's I haven't really seen a lot of white paper on it, just some noise. It's misinformation at this point. You'll have to look into it yourself. But I'm wondering, with the new normal of constant change requiring mastering a perpetual transformation, what is disruptive innovation? Why is it important? why is it so hard to, a lot of organizations are designed to execute and not innovate. So again, why is it important? Why is it hard?
Innovation in general, one of the reasons why it's hard is to innovate is literally to go against or to do what others are not willing, capable, financed to do. Now, as a small company, we're a small company, so we don't have the Altria $2 billion to develop vape tech. But what I would say is for every Altria, there's 100 very small companies that are going to be going out to the same market. Maybe not with those types of resources, but at the end of the day, there are companies that put billions of dollars into innovation all the time that never do anything. Then there are small companies that end up becoming Instagram. So innovation is just a word. The idea behind it, which is creating something new. And in the case of a capitalist, creating something new that you can capitalize off of, that's a difficult thing. It's a difficult task. And it's because it involves, especially in cannabis, it involves understanding or at least predicting what you think people are going to want in the future. Now, if you are a consumer like myself and like my business partner, who's been in this market professionally for whatever, 5 years legally and maybe much longer illegally, but if you're a consumer in that time frame and you're a product manufacturer and you're an equipment manufacturer, let's say you may have some advantage because as a consumer, we kind of know what we want. As a product manufacturer, we can then make those products. As an equipment manufacturer, we can design equipment to do it much more efficiently. For me, just from a macro standpoint, companies that innovate will always be, to me, more valuable than a company that can just produce a billion widgets very efficiently. There are definitely companies, including in this state and others, that are doing great from a revenue standpoint because they can produce many, many widgets because they're well financed at a very low margin and still get by because they can lose money for years and they'll never go out of business because they're well capitalized. And I think those companies are important because they drive the market. But for me, I love innovative companies, no matter what size they are, because at the end of the day, innovation is what's necessary to move an industry forward. Yeah, people will always love weed, of course. But, years ago, nobody knew that a vape pen was even a way to consume cannabis. And, there's still the jury's out on how healthy it is. But one thing I would say for sure, a properly manufactured vaporizer is a healthier way of consuming cannabis than a joint. And the reason that is with a joint, you're combusting things. So you're producing byproducts that are not what you want to consume. They're carcinogenic. In the case of a properly manufactured vaporizer, which jury's out on what that means, but a properly manufactured vaporizer that can get the exact temperature range that you want for optimal vaporization is always going to produce a much cleaner, inhalable smoke, or in this case, vapor, than smoke would ever. Are we going to see adverse effects on people who have vaped for however many years with vaporizers that are unproven or whatever? Yeah, of course. This is still new technology, but and we still lack a lot of information. But I will say is tech innovation and technology in general, just because it isn't great in the first go around, should never be hampered. Innovation is necessary. Innovation will always be necessary to drive an industry forward.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest hurdles is banking. Obviously, in Canada, they have access to capital. They're able to go up there, file an IPO or reverse takeover, get that capital, come back into the U.S. We've already seen a lot of them kind of acquire hemp, property, plant, and equipment, take advantage of that 280E so they can write off those on their taxes. And then in the eventuality that THC is legalized, then they can just transfer those assets over to the cannabis side. But as we wrap this interview up, want to ask about where things are going to be heading in the future. So we're looking at herbal extracts that are gaining notoriety worldwide with the rising health consciousness towards consumption of natural and organic products. We see that plant extracts in North America mainly used for food additives, while it's widely used in Europe, like you mentioned, for medicine. Due to the high demand of quality plant extract concentrates from places like China, the price and is expected to increase, but on a smaller scale. There's a recent study that recommends new entrants whose only value add is capital, but without tribal knowledge, technical advantage, and downstream support to not enter the plant extract field, as he sees strong sales, but with lower revenue expectations. And so with all of that, how do you see the extraction process changing over the last 5 years? What do you predict will happen in the next 5 years? And what's the most interesting thing you've seen this year?
Well, over the last, we've seen a lot of changes in the last 5 years. People have become much more educated, especially in the recreational markets here in the U.S. I would say the markets here in the U.S., the recreational markets are definitely driving innovation and extraction. And over the last 5 years, kind of the big changes we've seen is, people going bigger, finding cleaner, more efficient ways to do things. But I would say that, the big guys and the best have always been the best, no matter what equipment they had. And now they just have good equipment and probably a good amount of capital to build much better facilities. And that's probably the biggest change I've seen is people went from, the best extractors were doing it in their garage or in maybe a small facility that wasn't very safe. Now those best extractors are, they have a production facility that would rival any manufacturing plant you'd see in any other industry. So that's kind of one of the biggest changes I've seen. I think one of the big changes we're going to see or in the next 5 years are going to be on the regulatory front, especially here in the U.S. As more and more markets open up from a state standpoint, I think at some point, maybe not this session and this election cycle, but maybe during the next election cycle, we'll see federal legalization on the ballot, which, there are positives and negatives to that, especially as a business owner. But what I would say is that the big change we're going to see is as more and more states open up, we will see a general shift away from cannabis, especially in this country, being, kind of this drug, to cannabis being, all right, it's a plant, just like any other beneficial plants. And in the next 5 years, I think what we're going to see is, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, which is cannabis compounds, cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, alcohols, esters, all types of compounds in that plant matched with other compounds in other plants to produce effects. I was just having this conversation with somebody who, somebody who's pretty active in the space here in Washington and other places last night. And she was talking about the fact that she uses melatonin in addition to CBD at night to help her sleep as her kind of all natural remedy so that she doesn't have to, take some type of pharmaceutical drug. And to me, that's just a small microcosm and she's somebody who's very active in the space. But the fact that there isn't a product like that out there already, maybe there is. It just is not hit the mainstream in cannabis of using melatonin and CBD and maybe a little THC to help you sleep at night. Everybody knows melatonin will help you sleep, but the combination of these compounds might help you even more so. So I think there are some companies that are already kind of working on those types of holistic plant medicines with CBD or THC added to it. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future.
And last question, is there some opinion, thought, belief that you held, 18 months ago or 2 years ago where you no longer have that belief? Something relatively, recent in the last couple of years where you had a really strong belief. Like, for example, I had made the comment that brands don't exist in the cannabis industry 2 years ago. When you're asking about the highest THC at the lowest price, you're not asking for a brand. But when people tell you, oh, Fat Panda, you're going to go back and ask for that Fat Panda pre-roll, not because it meets your needs, it meets your financial budget. And so I believe that now with some products failing, we've had 5 infused joints and 5 regular joints fail for mold. We've had Eagle 20 and herbicide in cartridges. We've had all these issues. And so it's kind of changed my mind that branding is becoming more important because of the quality, because of the consistency. And so 2 years ago, I didn't think branding mattered, and now I do. Is there something that you felt or believed in, maybe 2 years ago that you've changed your mind?
Where I've changed my mind. Yeah, in a sense. So I used to joke when we first started doing this. First with Vuber 5 years ago, and then with Lucid 4 years ago. Which I would always make the joke like we're in the compliance and education business, and as a byproduct, we get to sell weed because people are dumb in general. And I don't mean consumers. I mean all people. There are people in this industry that we have to re-educate about extraction specifically. There are people with huge businesses, have no idea how the plant operates and what's in there and what we should be getting out of it. And you will continue to see that. I assume by now, generally, because the U.S. is a big country and because Canada made things federally legal a couple years ago, that that enough dominoes would have fallen by now, going into 2020. Right, that it would be less likely when I traveled that I would have to educate people so much about what's going on and specifically, extraction. And it's because the information's available. We live in the age of information. You can go online right now and find out about almost anything, down to the scientific level where you can pull up white papers for free and get educated. I guess what I probably didn't take into account is that people are lazy, and that doesn't matter how much information's out there, there's way more distractions. And at the end of the day, the average consumer, the average business owner, they want to be educated on average, but not to the point where it makes them have to go outside their comfort zone or work harder than they really want to. Now, there is a small microcosm, I would say a very small majority or a very small minority of people in the cannabis industry in general that want to know everything and are trying their best to always be knowledgeable about what's going on. And some people better than others. I wouldn't say I'm the most knowledgeable. I would say in my network, I have the capability to know everything that's going on within my network. So I keep some of the really smart people real close, and we have our groups and we have our meetings and we have our conversations about what's really happening. But I was wrong. People need to be informed, and it's our job, and you're doing a great job of it, and I try to do the best I can, to always be patient and educate people, from the consumer out in Bosnia, where I had my vape and he had his cigarette vape, and I was explaining to him that I had CBD in my vape and how that was possible, all the way to CEOs at huge companies in the cannabis space that still need to be educated on exactly what extraction is and why terpene extraction might be important, or why building specific components in a manufacturing plant, even though he doesn't think it's necessary now, might be important for the future of her business. Those types of things I didn't think I would need to do, but more and more I'm realizing, if you want to be an industry leader, part of what you need to be comfortable doing and part of what you should take as a requirement is that you will always have to educate people about what's going on, what's been done, what's happening now, and probably what's going to be happening in the future. And I didn't think that was going to be the case, and I was mistaken.
People need your SOPs, so how can they get a hold of you?
Well, you can reach me on my website. It's lucidoils.com. You can reach me via email, Jimmy, Jimmy, at lucidoils.com. And those are the best ways to reach me. You can also call my office, my main office in Seattle. And that office number is 206-588-0691. Just keep calling. Somebody will pick up. We're pretty busy. Oh, one more. You can catch us on the gram at Lucid Oils and at Lucid Lab Group. Catch us on the gram.
Definitely one of the top 3 in the industry worldwide. Get a hold of them if you can. So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. I want to thank my guest, Jim Makoso with Lucid Oils. Check him out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.